Since April 2011, the Republican has been marking the 150th anniversary of the Civil War with a monthly series of articles looking back on how Western Massachusetts took part in the conflict at the battlefield and on the home front. Now, the first half of those reports and some additional material have been collected in book form. I sat down with the authors, Republican Executive Editor Wayne Phaneuf and former Springfield Library and Museums President Joe Carvalho, to discuss Volume 1 of A Not-So-Civil War.
This first volume goes right up until the eve of Gettysburg.
Exactly. Literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
And we thought that was a good place to stop because we have 49 chapters altogether and then a new story with each chapter. Some of those stories are actually compilations of people, in their own words is what we call them, people who lived through some of these terrible battles. And so there was no way we could all fit it into one book. And it basically started, the idea was, could we sustain this? And it was a 4-year effort, 49 months, and it was a labor of love. But the way we did it, the methodology on it was to take a look at the Republican from April of 1861. And the only way to really do it and do it the right way is to read every single page of every single Republican from April of 1861 to April of 1865.
Joe Carvalho, let me throw in a note here. The first time I met you was about 30 years ago. I was working as a reporter at Channel 40. ABC Network was doing a series on the Civil War, a dramatic series, and they told me, they said, there's quite a storehouse of material at the Springfield Library. You were running the history department.
Yes, sir.
At that time. I went down, you made available to us a diary of a local Civil War soldier who had been injured. And
I remember that, Jim. It was great. Of course, it was a big deal to have you there. So we said, well, let's roll out the red carpet.
Well, you sure did. And, it's been quite a story ever since. But I was amazed by the wealth of material. Obviously, as a guy who grew up elsewhere, I was aware of the Springfield Armory, and certainly Massachusetts sent a lot of men off to the war. But Springfield, really, a lot of Civil War history right here.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's what makes this book more than simply a local history. And I would say that anybody interested in the Civil War, whether they're in California or they're in Texas or wherever, this book is not just about Springfield and Western Mass. We were the arsenal of democracy. We had all these gun makers. There were over 350 different gun makers and accoutrement manufacturers throughout our region. We had, of course, a tremendous amount of regiments involved with it. But not only that, we had individuals who weren't associated with the local regiments, but were nationally important military leaders. For example, was it Rufus Saxton from Greenfield was in charge of the Southern Department. What was that? Well, that was all the freed areas of the South. He was in charge of that. That's a guy from Western Mass. Big job. And of course, we were also the hotbed of anti-slavery before the war. And so that continued throughout to politicking for the 13th Amendment, et cetera.
Let me ask you, the story, the legend that always goes around is Confederate spies came into Springfield at one point and were going to try to plant a bomb, some kind of explosive, in the Springfield Armory building. Goes back and forth. What do you think, Wayne?
Well, I don't have to think anymore. I know it was true. And that's one of the things that we discovered.
Yeah.
Everybody said, I don't think that's true. It's a legend. And what happened was everybody was looking at the period that the war was going on. What they did, even though this happened a year before the end of the war, it wasn't really
It's a news embargo on that.
Yeah, it wasn't made public until several months after the war. And then there's the whole narrative in the Republican 2 or 3 months after the war ended about the 2 Confederate agents dressed as women who came up into the armory. They went up to the building that's still there where the clock tower is. They went up to clock tower and they put what they called a coal torpedo, C-O-A-L, and it looked like a lump of coal, and it had a fuse on it. They put it there. Now, this had been used to destroy a lot of ships. It was really an invention, a Confederate invention. And what happened was the The guard was a little suspicious. I guess it might have been the 5 o'clock shadow on these women that went up there. But so after they left, he went up and he found the torpedo. Luckily, the fuse, they were lit by a fuse. The fuse went out, so it didn't explode. These people disappeared and were never caught. And it looked like they probably came down from Canada.
But the mystery is now answered in this book.
Absolutely.
We find the story finally. John, let me ask you, one of the things that struck me as I read the book, the home stories, the letters home, the frightening things that happen, illness, huge problem for the men at the front. There's talk of a measles epidemic that took a number of local soldiers. And there's also talk about women who went along as nurses. Wasn't always looked well upon by society. And there's one point where there's advertising. You want to make sure these are plain women, not handsome or attractive women. And that engendered quite a debate, I guess.
Well, I mean, yeah, let's face it, the women in camp, with all these men that had been away from women for that long, of course. And of course, if you're injured, you look at these women as angels, and of course, you can be attached to them. So we tell those stories that are usually left untold with only the battles being talked about, but we talk about both in this book.
And it's volume 1, so there's more to come. Joe Carvalho, Wayne Phaneuf, thank you both for coming in.
Thanks, Jim.